everybody. It's Lindsay here, Executive Director and Child Life Specialist with A Children's House for the Soul, a community for those with skin conditions. And thank you so much for joining me on this Saturday morning. Don't forget, if you would like to participate in this Bible study live or be more interactive, please leave a note in the comments below. I would love to do a Zoom with anyone who is interested so that we can have a little bit of community in this time of staying home, staying safe, and keeping a little bit of a distance from one another. I also wanted to share today that along with, of course, pulling things from the Bible, I also pulled a couple of ideas, and I will try to make sure that I cite them when I do it. But I pulled a couple of ideas, one from this devotional, You're God's Girl, which is by Winter Pitts. And then I also pulled a few ideas from Present Over Perfect by Shauna Nyquist. And both of those are linked in the comments below. So I just wanted to share that I pulled a couple of those ideas. But so this week, I would love to talk about trust. So last week we talked about fear and being afraid and how the Bible tells us over and over again that God doesn't want us to be afraid. He wants us to know that He has us in the palm of His mighty right hand. But I'm sure that some people are thinking, I'm thinking, thanks for the advice. I don't want to be afraid. I'm not being afraid on purpose, right? Circumstances in the world are causing me to be fearful. And so I thought, what is the action word if we don't want to be afraid? The thing we do want to do, the thing we want to work on building in ourselves is feeling trust in the Lord. And so I thought I would talk about one of my favorite stories of trusting in the Lord. And now I'm going to have to trust my brain for a second. There we go. And pull up where the story is in the Bible. I'm sure everyone knows it, but I want to talk about our friend, the disciple Peter. And he had practice in trusting in the Lord. And actually, he shows great deal of faith and a great deal of trust in this story. But we all know too, and thank God, God chose not only imperfect people, right? Because no one is perfect, but God also chose some fumbling, bumbling, mistake-making people to talk about in the Bible. People that, and Peter's one of them. And so I wanted to talk about the story when Peter walks on the water with Jesus. So let's just read it super quick. And I'm just going to skip ahead. So we know that the boat is far from land. It's nowhere close at all. The disciples are on it without Jesus. And it says, shortly, it's Matthew 14, 22 through 23 that I'm going to read. And it says, and actually even less than that, the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. And I wanted us to notice that they were afraid. Even after all this time they've spent with Jesus and the miracles that they've seen Jesus do, they were still fumbling, bumbling people just like us, and they were afraid. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, it's me, Jesus, hello. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Peter then got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. Now that's huge, right? Peter not only, and Jesus didn't say, "Hey, one of you decide who, come walk out to me on the water," right? Peter had such faith that he wanted the Lord to call to him. He wanted to be near to the Lord. So that's something that feels really cool, right? So God just wants us to want to be near him, to trust him, to not be afraid. They were all afraid. It says right there in the word, it says that they were all afraid before. And God wasn't like, "Hey, I have this idea, come out to me if you're scared." It was Peter's idea. Peter said, now, I'm not saying God didn't know he was going to do that, right? But what I mean is Peter says on his own volition, call me out to you. And then Peter does it. Peter has this enormous, beautiful, wonderful step in faith. And he walks on the water. Peter does with Jesus. How cool is that? He's walking towards him. Even though he was just very fearful, he takes this step out in faith and he does it. But then we know what happens, right? So then it says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cries out, Lord, save me. So his faith wavers, right? Peter doesn't have perfect trust in God. His trust wavers for a minute and he looks around. He loses his focus on Jesus. He looks at all the circumstances around him and he gets scared. Immediately, though, immediately. Not after he lets him tread water for a second, not after Peter cries and cries and cries. It says immediately. Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? Okay, now I want to talk about that part for a minute. So we talked about that Peter did trust. When he had his eyes on Jesus, he was staying on the water. He was doing it. And then when he lost sight, he looked at all the circumstances around him. He got scared and he started to sink. But then he cried out and Jesus took his hand. And then I want to talk about that part where it says, Jesus said, you of little faith. Why did you doubt? And I want to tell you what I always thought. So when I always thought as a kid growing up, actually even as a grown up, I have thought in my mind, maybe not on purpose, not because anybody told me this, but I have always pictured Jesus kind of being mad and disappointed. I have always pictured Jesus kind of saying it like, why do you have so little faith? Why did you doubt? And I think I thought that because that's maybe how a lot of us people would feel. I think of even myself with my kiddo, and she's standing on the edge of her bed. It's tall, and she likes to stand on the edge of it, and she likes to say, Mommy, can you catch me? And I say, yes, I'm ready, and she jumps, and she'll say, oh, you caught me. And I'm like, yeah, of course I caught you. I said I would. I think that is actually maybe the way we're supposed to hear Jesus tell Peter. Not, why do you have so little faith? Why did you doubt me? Not frustrated, not surprised, because Jesus is God, right? And he already knows that we struggle with fear. And he already knows that we struggle with trusting. And so instead of hearing when we read this passage, instead of hearing frustration or disappointment, what if instead we heard, why did you have so little faith? Why did you doubt? What if he says it like that, like pleading, like, didn't you know, sweet Peter, that I was going to catch you? Didn't you know that I would be right there to help you walk on that water? What if instead of frustration or anger, the feelings that maybe we might have if we expected someone to trust us and to come through for them, what if it was like a mother to a child or a father to a child or a brother? What if instead we heard his voices saying, why did you have so little faith? I was right here the whole time. And so I think when we're looking at, and we're saying like, okay, we talked about fear last week, and I appreciate that God doesn't want us to be afraid, and the Bible tells us that God has us and that he is in control of all these wild circumstances. So what do I do if I'm going to try to not be afraid? I'm going to try the action word. I'm going to try and be trusting. But I'm not always going to be good at it. I think what we can learn from this story is, one, that God isn't frustrated and disappointed when we, or angry with us when we have those moments of distrust, when we lose our faith for a minute. He just wants us to keep our eyes on him and know that he is in control despite the circumstances. So Peter starts to sink when he looks around at the wind. And I don't know about you, but that could happen to me right now too. If I start to look around and I say, it feels like COVID-19 is never going to go away. It feels like we're not any closer to a solution. It feels like the kids will never be able to go back to school. We'll never be able to have a party again. It feels like even when this is finally all over, that the businesses aren't going to be okay and people aren't going to get their jobs yet. If we look at all these other surrounding circumstances, it's like we are in that storm. It's like we're in that boat and it's rocking back and forth and the water is coming over the side. But if we can keep our eyes focused, if we can try to trust, and we know from Peter that trust takes practice, but if we can keep our eyes on Jesus, we can stay afloat. And we know that trust takes practice, that we are not naturally good at it, or that we have to continue to do it. So one of the ideas I borrowed from this great book. So I borrowed the ideas about, hearing Jesus's voice differently and hearing him like a father to a child instead of like someone who's frustrated. That's some of the content that I took from that beautiful Present Over Perfect book. But this idea I'm borrowing from this one by Winter Pitts. And when we're practicing trust, right, it's something we want to get good at. We want to get better at it. We want to learn how to better keep our eyes on Jesus. So one really cool thing that she suggests, an activity she suggests that we can do, we can look in our history, look back over our life and find ways that everything has turned out okay, or that God has used everything to his glory, or we just let go of a worry to him and he took over and he made everything okay, or he was still holding our hand. So I wanted to share that as a great idea. You can do it in a journal. You can also, if you're not much of a writer, you can tell it to a friend, or tell it to your mom, or tell it to your husband, or tell it to your brother or sister, so that when you go to them and you say like, oh, the storm all around me, the wind is blowing, I'm feeling anxious about my circumstances, they can remind you of those circumstances in your past have all turned out okay, or turned out for the glory of God, or that sometimes things don't turn out okay. The Bible doesn't promise us that everything's going to be okay, but it does promise us that God's going to never leave us. And so maybe they can say, even though remember that time that you were completely in despair and everything was changing all around you, but you could see God still working through the mess. So whether you do that for a journal and you do that now for your future self, or you do it with a friend or family member, I hope that it helps and we're all just working together to build that trust and remembering that God knows that we aren't going to be perfect in our trust, and he just wants to reach out his hand when we call and be a father and a brother to us and be alongside us and help us in our journey of trusting and bringing our eyes back to him. So thank you so much for listening. And again, please remember that even though I'm sharing these Bible studies from a Christian perspective, we at A Children's House for the Soul love all the souls, and we want to be there for all the children and families who need us. And so whether you're a Christian believer or you have beliefs that go another way, or if you're not sure what you believe at all, we love you. We want to be here for you. Reach out to us. You can email me at unite@achildrenshouse.org. You can comment below, and please like and subscribe to our videos so that you can keep finding out about us and be a part of our community for those with skin conditions. Have a great day.